In the year 2012, I begin my record. I have been called on and inspired, I believe, to be a record to write somewhat as to concerning the things I have learned and experienced in my simple life. I am not a millionaire, nor am I a doctor, nor a lawyer, nor a successful businessman or CEO. I hope you will see past these inadequacies as I set down this spiritual poetry. Do not judge my weaknesses too hastily, for however you judge, so shall you be judged. Do not hold my lack of worldly success as disdain against me as I try to impart my record to you and yours. As I am now nearing my first midlife crisis, I feel compelled to leave this treatise behind for all the beloved generations to come. Do not think me crazy to create such an obsessive, compulsive attempt at permanence for you. I am neither crazy nor stupid. What you see before you is an artifice, an attempt at artistry. I am an artist. The first declaration I would make may seem self-aggrandizing, but it must be said clearly to avoid any appearances of wishy-washiness, which is the great bane, the bête noire of any significant religious movement. And so I say it bluntly, I am an artist. I am Vance Mellen. This is my book, which time only will tell may be a book of prophecy. You see, even as a young child, I was easily wrought upon by the Spirit of God and the Holy Ghost, as I will describe at later points in this record, not by way of manipulation or persuasion, or as an attempt to become your guru, or to brainwash you into following me, or to manipulate you into joining my cult. For I, and any hopes I have of establishing an official religion of sorts, will be fully diminished and dissolved by the time you stumble upon, or better yet, are led to this record by God, or by your own simple spirit of inquiry, that as you find this record, so many hundreds of years will have passed, that I will be long dead, and many other religions will be dead and gone too. As a child, I strove to follow the teachings, as I understood them, to come from God. I never really strayed far from the paths of righteousness. I had good parents, not aristocrats, not supreme leaders, not poor or inadequate in any way. In other words, there was nothing about my parents that would lead anyone to desire them, but they were simply good. No, nothing about them should lead you to conclude that they would somehow raise a leader, let alone a prophet, or better, a seer, another name for an artist. Even in my teenage years, which can be very difficult at times for someone of the human race, I strove to obey the laws of the fathers. Despite not a few challenges, I stuck it out in this earth life and have wrestled a good wrestle and have endured thus far, and have some personal reassurances that I will yet endure to the end of this challenging earth life to make it to some form of a higher plane yet. Thus I have learned much and feel a need, indeed a hankering, to share some future sojourner a mere few of the things which I have been woven from. I have not been rich, and in a church of my forming there would be no rich and poor among us, or, in other words, this is simply because there will either be all poor or all rich among us, with no division or castes, tiers, privileges. We cannot all be rich. If we cannot all be rich, then it must needs be that we will all be happily poor together. This edict must be secure in order to fully protect the most vulnerable and fragile of a religious commune, the artists. These are they that I consider to be the seers and special emissaries of God, to create and disseminate the visions of God and a godly life, notwithstanding the artist's own individual weaknesses and sins. Still, the artist should be seen as a blessing, a delight to the church. They should be elevated to all spiritual positions, never administrative positions, in the church, for they are clearly the visionaries that cannot, though be worshipped as cult leaders. for they are far too and all too human to be considered perfection or worshipful. It is the combination of this clear and lovely seership with the all too human which will keep idolatry and inappropriate worship at protective bay. Artists are the seers of the church, and the seer is even greater than a mere prophet because they see the past, present, the future, and the follies in everything present, and they alone are capable of bringing all the human foibles clearly to our attention, clearly to our vision. We then, too, can become a form of vicarious seer through the clear visions of an artist. Seers, artists, see through a third eye. Artists have made it through the toughest of things and are well equipped to create and impart their ideas and visions to all that would but look and live. They make all brass serpents, engrave all plates, carve every tablet. Their works are the only things that remain from all past civilizations. Their works are really only ways in which we can envision long past worlds. Aren't you looking at my record right now? Artists see past and through all the puny clutter of this frustrating life and into something much greater from themselves and then for others. Artists are seers because of that one horrible thing that happened to them when they were but a child that changes them early and forever and turn them into an old man at a disturbingly young age. If there is to be a church or religiously based university, then this university should join together all types of teachers, especially and including the most liberal of religious instructors and the most conservative should be innovative of instructors counterbalanced by the most conservative of instructors. A carefully devised tenure system based largely on student feedback should be provided. The tenure committee should be carefully consider the feedback of all students. Negative feedback should be carefully vetted against the tenure of the religious professors. In other words, it should not be seen as negative for a professor to reveal a negative feedback that purports to have traumatized the student a bit, to have shaken their foundational beliefs. Students should be encouraged to take professors with the exact opposite ideologies of the student. Religion should be a constant seeking to be shaken, traumatized, disconcerted, offended, easily freaked out, messed up, sleepless nights of confusing times, tentative and irreconcilable ideas that do not fit at all into the coded beliefs of the student. This is true religion, and thus should be reflected in the pedagogy of the religious university. Do not be afraid to consider everything short of pornography, not to be defined by any committee, but to be defined by the individual. God sees all and is capable of managing those traumatic things he sees. We need to practice becoming like God. Do not allow this seeing everything to become an excuse for blatant self-indulgence. In a church with no judges, only the law of the land for its guides to worthiness. It should not be hard for a student of religion or a university to see all and be made uncomfortable periodically. Productive discomfort should be the aim of any good religion, though not as this discomfort relates to pure hateful guilt and self-loathing, but only insofar as it is brought to the fore in the conscience of the individual. We as gifted children of God are hard enough on ourselves. We don't need further judges and judgmental to form up even more self-loathing for our own persons. This is the gifted religious kid syndrome, to be ever vigilant about our own sins and religious inadequacies. We don't need someone else to tell us of our evils and shortcomings. There have been many times in my simple life when something has gone frustratingly wrong in the flow of things. For example, I'd be planning some sort of meeting, and I would go out into the car and find a flat tire there. I would become very angry and shake my fists at heaven and curse God and want to die. I guess this is my nature, to have an angry and vengeful disposition. Over time, however, I have come to realize that these setbacks in my schedule have an underlying purpose of meaning, and I think I can see through the fabric of this complication. I think God is doing it to save my life. God has interfered with my plans, or maybe one of his guardian angels has, and it is very presumptuous to assume God is so preoccupied with my insignificant life. God has interfered with my flow of plans so that I would not be in the wrong place at the wrong time. I remember delivering Penny Power, a nickel magazine, to neighbors. I may have been delayed in my deliveries, for example. I would often throw the newspaper on the porch. If I did it just right, the paper would be propped nicely against the door, and it would be there hanging with the plastic just enough to suggest that the plastic tore and gave way, causing the newspaper to fall to the porch. In this way, I could avoid climbing the stairs and hanging the Penny Power newspapers on the doorknob. This was done in case a watcher or someone from the company might drive by and see the fallen paper, which they might not suspect me of laziness. Then they might not expect me of laziness. It was an unethical shortcut, you see. I was required to hang the paper on the doorknob. At times, I would feel very guilty about these shortcuts. I would walk a half house away, and my guilty conscience would gnaw at me until I would be forced to turn around, rebag my newspaper, and hang it correctly on the doorknob where it belonged. You may suppose that I was way too preoccupied with being a perfectionist. I would have to agree, however, that this gnawing conscience that delayed me maybe 30 seconds or so on my journey to complete my newspaper deliveries. One day I was fraught with such delays. I arrived finally at the African-American themed hairdo place, and I walked past the open door, curiously dark inside. I walked on. Only a few minutes later, after passing Hair Today, Gone Tomorrow, did I hear sirens. As it turned out, the K-Suite newscast I heard on the radio, I learned that a disgruntled man had entered the hair salon and had shot 4 people dead inside. Surely this murderer had just crossed out moments before I had arrived. I was the first on the scene. What if my guilty conscience had not reversed my progress and plans fortuitously at any moment? Do not be angry with God if he chooses to slow you down in your plans. On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the most serious forms of murder, mass murder, premeditated murder, infanticide, etc., and 1 being, say, a cuss word, masturbation would rank around a 3 in sinfulness. Yes, it is certainly still a sin, but while it is a sin of self-indulgence and self-humiliation, it is a rather innocuous sin in that it affects no one else but the masturbator. Thus, it is a sin of less consequence and the weight in the world. Pity the poor mother that must clean those sheets. But nonetheless, the sin of masturbation is not wholly evil. Upon further consideration, I may even rank this sin around a 2 in terms of the egregiousness. So I would, in my church, grant one more indulgence related to such like sexual sins. I would allow a person to masturbate every other week, unless the married person has a willing partner. 1 week should amount to balance full fasting from sexual indulgences. Careful of fasting. After this week of fasting, an exception to the law should be made for the person who has exhibited such admirable self-control over this significant period. This law may be made adjustable according to the current prophet and leader of the church, but may not be fully eliminated. Those who take advantage of this bi-monthly indulgence should feel guilty for a period no longer than 4 hours, after which the masturbator should forgive themselves and move on with their life. Neither should this sin ever be accompanied by the viewing of pornography, not because viewing the human body is a pernicious evil, but because no man really knows the etiology or the derivation of the pornography. No one can fully know if the anonymous subject of the porn was complicit and a willing participant, or more likely than not, the photograph was a victim of rape, underage molestation, acting out in pornography as a way to fulfill an addiction to drugs or alcohol. Since there is no way to certify that the pornographed was a willing participant or indentured servant made slave to the situation, pornography should always be carefully avoided. Otherwise, you will have the proverbial blood on your garments. Likewise, one should never use illegal drugs. Avoid all addictive substances. Stay in relative control of your body, because what little control you do have will quickly be tested and eroded by the challenges and addictive genes meted to every man and woman through the course of our lives. In regards to homosexuality, it is also forbidden, but like other sins, it ranks around a 4 or 5 in the evil meter, so long as it does not become habitual or entirely self-indulgent. The homosexual may be allowed to use the once every 5 years adjustable by current prophet, as noted above, to indulge in homosexual behavior without much lasting guilt. But they are encouraged to be moderate, to moderate their desires, as should every human. Everyone should feel guilt for a sin or indulgence, but this guilt should never last longer than just a few days. Then it is time to move on with your life. If you give in and indulge in a chosen sin, you will quickly see a very revealing pattern emerge shortly after you commit said sin, which is this. Usually within 24 hours after you sin, while your guilt is still hotly burning within you, you will be called on to use your spirituality somehow for the good of mankind. You will flash upon your sin, and you will instantly recognize the game the devil is playing to make you feel enough guilt that you will be unwilling to serve, and you will feel only unworthy. Suddenly, you will see the patterns in which the devil works. You will have a stronger belief and understanding regarding the mutability and workmanship, the sneakyality and workmanship of Lucifer. So sinning is not always only a bad thing. There is a small reward that can be derived from indulgences, never fully with the sin, but it is there nevertheless. If you are willing to sacrifice any and all indulgences, you will see much greater and sooner progress in your individual spirituality. You will be rewarded, though how, I cannot say or really quantify. Earlier in this document, I wrote that I was not a prophet and that I had not received a calling to preach. I wrote that I had no right, as granted by God, to lead any church or any form of church. While this is in essence true, in many ways I have been called to write this document, and I have a number of experiences in my life that make me think that I am supposed to write this document at this time in my life. I would like to review a few of these experiences here, so that you can judge for yourself if I am a prophet, or at the very least, a seer. It is said in my circles that a seer is greater than a mere prophet because they have the power to see the past, present, and future. They are given the power to create doctrine and essentially speak for God. I do not pretend to this, but I have had my experiences that make me think that I am here for a reason. And since I have discovered no real reason for my life and existence so far, that the very reason I am here is to write this document right now. Every day I wonder what my special purpose is. Maybe this is my purpose, to be writing this record for you, and I will not have invented new names or places for this record. I will not try to create a history for your enjoyment or entertainment. I am simply trying to write some of the experiences and thoughts that suggest to me that I am doing this for a reason. As a very little child, my first memory, a woman escaping from an insane asylum jumped off a bridge into a ravine in front of my home in Potwin, Kansas. Topeka. My father rescued her from the limestone rocks. There was little or no water at the bottom of the 25-foot drop. My father took her from the rocks and bound her bloody, bleeding head while she mewed and screamed in the front porch of our house. Yes, I have seen many things that made me quite old before my time. I learned that day to help my fellow man, even if they are bleeding profusely. You cannot fear to serve, even if you're afraid of getting a serious blood disease like hepatitis or AIDS. Giving freely of yourself and yourself despite your fears. Next memory, there was a tractor-trailer truck parked at the end of my block. There was no trailer attached to the tractor. Exposed was the greasy hub of the truck. It was filthy and grease and road dirt, dust, and mud. I played on this truck and climbed all over it for what surely must have been an hour. My mother called me and I ran home. I was waiting for Mom to see how filthy I was. To my astonishment, I was clean, so clean. I was protected from the soot and smut of the world, at least for that day. This left a distinct impression on my mind that I would see more miracles in the future. Indeed, I did. My next memory is stranger still. I distinctly remember turning on the spigot to get a drink of water at the side of our Potwin, Kansas home and seeing the most peculiar thing. A sputtering of water came out, and then a fish popped out. It was not a normal fish. It was a goldfish, the type of fish that is highly prized and respected as a sign or good omen or as an indication of spiritual eventualities. I was amazed, yet not too so, because I was growing accustomed to such signs and wonders early in my young life. I did live near the Topeka sewer plant, so there was still some slight doubt in my heart as to whether this was truly a miracle or not. I quickly rationalized this experience away to the sewage treatment plant. I am sorry to report that seeing a sign will not fully make you a seer or prophet. Yes, the signs are very powerful at the moment of their sacred inception, but soon they melt away as if they were the hoarfrost in the warming morning sunshine. They are transitory and fleeting, to be consumed in our lust. Do not put much stock in them and hold them dear to your heart. Don't throw your miracles out there for everyone to see or read. Some of them are sacred and are meant only for you and for your family. As I indicated earlier, I lived at the bottom of Topeka, Kansas, in Potwin, where sewers all let drain into the sewage treatment plant. The lowest of geographies in the entire area, much like the Dead Sea in Israel. It was as though I could sense all the underground tunnels and tubes and caverns and locks all pulsing and ebbing beneath the earth, right beneath my very home, and electricity flowing like sludge, blood coursing slowly, fetid and full of dregs and waste of humanity, all slowly flowing, the slow work of a lymph system ebbing in the body of the earth. Then here were the innumerable Indian reservations all over the landscape with their hidden missile silos 50 feet underground, leased to the feds in a sort of pathetic prostitution. There were a few men living beneath those small, square, fenced-off, no-man lands. So it seemed there were always things living or flowing under me, the presence of which I could not easily forget. Maybe this is why I thought a train passed through my attic eaves closet as a child, though I now know that this is an impossibility. The point is, I could not be allowed the simple pleasure of a carefree childhood. What with the Kansas State Asylum next door, the sewers, the mysteries of the tractor-trailer hub, the eyeless catfish in the Kansas River, the deadly eddies at the perilous Kansas River, the impending doom of rising storms and tornadoes creeping over the Indian burial grounds with rented missile silos, the trains in my closets, and the mysteries of the goldfish in the water spigot, the boy with a dead octopus in a small mason jar, the suicide bridge over the forbidden ravine that ever threatened careless children's lives, the tornadoes, the food storage with glowing nuclear candies inside, everything to keep the children. Not disqualify the artist, determine the qualification of a prophet doesn't necessarily become the next prophet. Artists work among the people are indeed the more weird and is made a living in the arts. Controversial the arts, the better. Good arts, there should be when they can, someone who has, when we know that this artist committed or will have courage to speak in conjunction with their current and then something controversial living prophet. They will arise in the administration work among to determine through the church only the qualification of the artist's work controversial with also the method of choosing, have the courage to speak out, and the next prophet should be kept and make the wholesome changes secret so that no man shall aspire. This was a typographical error, but nevertheless I think there's some meaning in it. To become the next leader, the power of the really speak there are the prophets of the church, the weird, we shall need the church, weird, controversial, and will penetrate, lead the people, will not disqualify the artist, not determine the quality from the artist, the next prophet, artist work. The people are indeed the more weird and controversial art, the better. Good art. There should be then when we know that this artist committed, their artists and will have courage to speak in conjunction with the current and up with something controversial, living prophet, and they will arise as in the administrative work to determine notion of church. It's just, yep, good, it's still recording. Work controversial will in method of choosing have courage to speak up. The next prophet should be kept in troublesome changes, secrets only so that no man will aspire. Only the gutsy artists will have to become the next leader, the power to really speak their minds. The prophets of the church, the weird and the kind of weird controversial art. The person will lead the church. Not weird controversial art will not disqualify artists from becoming the next prophet. Indeed, the more weird and controversial art, the better. When we know that this artist will have courage to speak up when something controversial arises in the administration of the church. Only this controversial artist will have the courage to speak up and make their troublesome changes. Only the gutsy artists will have the power to really speak their minds. We need that kind of person to lead the church. Essentially, this is saying that artists should lead the church because they have courage to speak up and make controversial art in spite of social pressure. My church should be run by artists only. Not old men, lawyers, doctors, or especially businessmen will be allowed to be the leader and a prophet of the church. Why? Because the leaders of this church should be called either directly by God or they should be proven visionaries. They should have a clear vision of the calamities we will face in the future. Artists are the only humans that can see the past, present, and future clearly. They have the ability to recreate what they see, either by pen, paper, or even by computer. What they see is essential to the survival of the human race in relation to God. This is the only way that other humans will be able to participate in the divine visions unless it is given to them to be visionaries themselves, in which case they may as well be the leaders and prophets themselves. Lawyers, doctors, businessmen can only feed off the visions of others. They justify their dishonesties and mooch off the creations of others. Rarely do they see anything in time for themselves, anything of time for themselves. Rather, they build the visionaries and commoditize the visions. They are thieves and robbers. They build nothing of their own. They only charge usury fees. Old men, as I noted, are also forbidden to be rulers of this church. Why? Because the lawyers, doctors, businessmen are too powerful. They have the means of ensconcing themselves in systems and are usually indestructible except by and with the very power of God unto bringing the old men down to destruction. Now, to some it is given to administer to the church. There does need to be a set of leaders that can faithfully contribute to the running and organization of the church. These are they that are called to administer and set the appointments of the artists, seer, and revelators. They can help the leaders of the church to buy things, organize meetings, protect the interests of the church leaders or prophets. I think the best word for the church leader is the seer, for nothing is greater than the seer in this world. Almost all artists are seers at the very least. They are like the greatest of all prophets, he being John the Baptist, a hairy maniac, long-haired hippie living off of nothing, locusts in the wilderness, poor, unemployed. An artist rarely makes much money. The artist has been raised up and reared and schooled and made used to living on poor and in the poorest of poverty. Even a successful artist cannot be far from the years of sacrifice and suffering that were required of them to become a success. Most artist successes are only a paltry and meager nothingness compared to the money made by the lawyers, doctors, and businessmen. It is also usually only the elderly or veteran artists that will find the great and impressive wealth that many contemporary artists have arrived at. The other check and balance in the selection of these church leaders arrives through the last edict or caveat that protects the faithful interest, which is to protect faithful's interest, which is protection that the leader of the church should not be an old man. What constitutes an old man? One who has lost their courage to be controversial, a renegade, a John the Baptist, a gadfly, a conscious, a reminder, a radical, a revolutionary. For traditionally, these are what all the true and powerful prophets through time have been. This check on old men will weed out those that would ensconce themselves. They should be retired and should become emeritus as soon as they turn around age 55 or until another young visionary arrives to change and challenge the system. How will we know legitimate visionaries? Well, they will be clear pictures of the past, present, and future. They will give only a few but powerful signs for believers. If they give too many signs, their signs should be suspect. Signs do not prove anything, and they do provide safety and security from calamities. The truest prophets will be warned ahead of time by God of an impending calamity and will warn the people in a timely and specific manner that something dreadful is impending. They will give specific guidance how and what to do to avoid the trouble coming. The protective measures may be as simple as warning the followers to paint lamb's blood or the blood of a beloved family pet as a sacrifice above the mantle top of the door jamb. With this simple gesture of faith, the followers may be protected, and the angel of death will surely pass over them. To me, this will be sufficient enough sign with lives safely saved for the average follower to know that this leader has moved beyond the leader stage and into a mode of creating the greatest good, protecting the human family from destruction. It is a good and serious sign that must be carefully considered at that point. It is still no guarantee that they are the only prophet. Indeed, in this church there may be many sincere leaders contributing to the church, but now a sign has been given which may elevate this new artist prophet into a state of greater seership with the greatest clarity or vision of seership yet. Usually this new prophet should be allowed to take over or at least contribute equally to the guiding of the church. There should be a degree of reluctance to take the mantle of the prophet. Aspiration is very unflattering in a prophet. The best prophet is one who is most willing to participate only occasionally in the conducting of revelation. If I am living in alternate realities, or as new sciences of string theory seem to indicate, we are living in one of many possible realities, then it is conceivable to me that the doctrines of this church should seriously meditate on the very good possibility that in another world, reality, universe, existence, time, space, dimension, place, or spiritual plane of light, that another version of myself is currently engaged in some sort of deviant behavior that I am now not currently engaged in my present choices of how I am now engaged in. I am sincerely trying to be a good man. I thought I once really had a propensity to become a serial killer or maybe a cult leader. Unfortunately, or truly, maybe fortunately, I was not charismatic enough to find any followers to come along with me into a cult. Maybe this is why I'm currently creating this religious document, to leave a message for generations, millions of years into the future, so that I can manipulate more primitive minds, so that I can find followers among the dead. I say dead because you will be alive in the future, but as for now, it seems to me that you have died and are gone for such a long time now, even though you will arrive in the future. In an existence without time, there is very little stock to be placed in a concept of past, present, and future. The only reliable, even fragilely reliable state of existence is this of the exact present only. Let's return to the ideas of manipulation. It would be so easy for me to manipulate future peoples that somehow I assume I will get through some sort of... Somehow I assume these people will go through some sort of purge or apocalypse that will render you and yours somehow inferior to me. Surely you will lose all understanding of the most complex technologies. Indeed, you have probably lost all knowledge of the English language with which I am now writing. My only hope is that a good God or an angel or some sort of supernatural being will arrive to aid you in the translation of my words into a state that you will be able to read and comprehend. Now, if my words are mostly or even predominantly inaccurate or in most cases untrue, then it is very unlikely that you will be even able to understand even a part of what I am writing. What's worse, you may never even be led to find this record which I am now writing. I guess it's possible that someone may find this record and suppress or censor or withhold the ideas herein from your generations, or, as is the case with many, and indeed we may say most works of art, are not suffered to exist very long in this world, no matter what efforts are made to preserve them. So if you're reading my words, let it be a powerful sign to you that they are before you now as a sign that they are true. True inasmuch as some things written by an artist could be considered even remotely true in most instances. This is the beginning of a new church, one rooted in the ideas of a lone man. I am neither God, nor am I even God's messenger. I am simply creating something which I deem good, without the pretense of imagining that my church is created by, sanctioned by, endorsed by, inspired by, dictated by, laid out by God. It is my simple imaginings of what my religion would or should be. I don't invite anyone to join this church. There is little price for admission. You don't even need an open mind to be a member of this church. Or as some are wont to say, it is truly not even an organized religion. In fact, it is a really disorganized religion. There are very few rulers or followers in my church. Somehow all participants are deemed equal, with a few exceptions which I will now outline in future words. I do not countenance any sort of judgmentalness in this church. Judge not, lest you be judged, a wise man once said. This church is designed for some sort of future time when the earth has been burnt over and most civilizations are long gone and new civilizations have grown up in the stead of this defunct time. Indeed, it is possible that this very earth has been moved out of this self-same sphere, whisked away to an entirely different universe, an entirely different state of being, another dimension, a dimension without time, past, present, or future. It is so, if it so be that this record happens to be discovered in some future time or place, I would hope that my document would be of some service to future generations of time. I hope that my best of religion will help future humans, or whatever we may become, to learn of the idea of religion. This language may never be decodable. This would make me sad indeed, but I hope if there is a God that appreciates art out there, that somehow he will provide the means of translating my words into something that your time will appreciate and understand. I have not even seen your time, nor can I hardly imagine what your time will be like. I cannot pretend to be that sort of seer, but I am an artist. And these are the type of individuals whose with the creative impulse, which you should invite to be your rulers, prophets, and seers. If you trust your poets, artists, and writers, and playwrights, and filmmakers, a form of art you may not have figured out how to develop yet, your writers, your painters, and sculptors, your actors, to be your leaders, it is very unlikely that they would lead you astray. Artists are very like the truest form of visionaries, prophets, and seers that can be tapped to build a true religion. Trust them, and they will help you see the most clearly. They will be set aside for you. The gifted artist is a rare, ephemeral pearl that you should not lose sight of. Keep your eyes transfixed on the artist for a long time, and soon you will see. You will see the beauty of your own rare humanity. You will feel the necessity of reaching out to God. You will be severely humbled by the power of the artist to persuade, manipulate, or more properly, to persuade and enchant you with their clear visions and perceptions of where this world has come from and where humanity is going. In my time, artists have even used the discoveries of historians and others to fully resurrect past lost civilizations. It is as if you are right there, having crossed through time to see how your ancient ancestors actually lived and loved. Nowadays, this is carried out by use of a mystical device many call the computer. In your time, it may be through a different medium, possibly through a storyteller. The effect is the same. I had one more momentous event that came to pass in my childhood, which I am now prepared to discuss at this juncture in my record. I was roughly 5 years old when I was apparently playing a non-sexual form of doctor with my little brother Trenton. Maybe this will account for my apparent disdain towards doctors as leaders in my church. Nevertheless, we were playing doctor. I also seem to recall that I also apparently placed a lamp on his chest as if it were a bright examination lamp. I believe I may have placed the electrical cord in his mouth. My mother claims that this cord was from a vacuum cleaner, though I specifically remember it being from a lamp cord, the very lamp that I had placed on my brother's chest. Now, I often question the veracity of any and all historical, scriptural, autobiographical, and or memories associated with traumatic events. I do wonder if I have manufactured a history of circumstances related to my brother's accident in an unconscious or subconscious effort to make sense of the terrifying possibility that this life is rooted in mere chance, unpredictability, chaos due to an indifferent or distant and unengaged God. Random chance and circumstance is, as a guiding principle of existence, is far more disturbing and unacceptable than the very guilt that I have taken upon myself for the death of my brother. I would rather feel guilty certainty than live with the dark notion that God does not exist or is in the very most indifferent to my and my fellow human beings' plights and triumphs. And so, on that fateful day, my sweet little normal little brother bit through the insulation. The thin insulation that separates all of us from a shocking death, a thin little film between life and death. This was all that separated my brother from being completely normal to becoming a dead child and electrocuted due to a simple biting too hard. It is all very sad to me. It has caused me many a day to ask God, where were you? In my church, you will find polygamy enshrined as a viable alternative to monogamy. Even if monogamy. If not, then at least a virgin will be provided an opportunity to have a sexual relationship every 5 years or so, as determined by the prophet at that time. The prophet should not ever be allowed to totally eliminate this indulgence, though he may be allowed to adjust the allowance periodically. It is entirely too difficult to live the law of chastity after about the age of 25. It is what amounts to a torture, a true burden and affliction upon the soul to be required to be chaste after also many years of life. So many years of life. It seems only fair and for the welfare of the human soul to be able to have a sexual relationship after so many years of proving oneself without guilt. This indulgence should probably not involve a prostitute. Hopefully God and faithful members can be granted some sort of indulgence card, never to be paid for, though, bought or sold, which can be purchased by the indulgee, by the indulger. I was a virgin, functional, though this may be a functional virgin. I am not so sure what kind of lover this made me. I don't think this indulgence should be formulated around the idea of being a better lover. This idea is a folly. It should be sought out as a consensual reward for faithfulness. In my church, I would eliminate much of the guilt that follows puritanical Christianity. Some guilt is required to keep the children of men in moral check, but too much guilt is satanic and counterproductive to the spiritual evolution of women and men. The most dangerous form of guilt can come from an appointed judge. I feel the necessity to eliminate all forms of spiritual judgment in my church. Let judgments be passed by legal judges in a state or country in which the offender lives. No man or woman should be judged or be appointed as judges over one another. I find through my readings of the scriptures, Judeo-Christian scriptures, that the sin that Christ hates the very most, the greatest sin, greater than even hypocrisy, and greater than murder, except for premeditated murder, is that of the sin of judgmentalness. He, Jesus Christ, who we'll discuss more later, hates imperfects, judging the imperfection of another person. I would ban all spiritual judges. I've honestly never fully understood why an all-powerful God would not be able to simply forgive at will. Why would an all-powerful God require an atonement? It's very hard for me to understand, as I think like a God might think. I can certainly understand why a man would devise the logic of an atonement, or a God condescending to take the sins of a person and paying the price of sin to a judgmental God, but this does not seem to be the logic and idea of an all-powerful God with the simple power to forgive whom he pleases, independent of whether a person's sins are formally atoned for. I think this should be the foremost question in any Christian church's mind. It is a mystery to me, and so I, like my Jesus, hate judgmentalness and anyone thinking that they are better than someone else. Cut each other some slack. Mind your own business. As an extension of this judgmentalness, I am very concerned about the seeming homogeneity that is often required in a Christian community, especially as this concerns the issue of politics, Republicans versus Democrats, conservatives versus liberals. I hate the judgments required by politics. I would like everyone in my church to feel free to follow whatever political course they might see fit to follow on their own life. Others should not judge them and should celebrate their differences and their unique ideas. Everyone in my church he shall be required to follow and learn from someone of the opposite political or philosophical dispositions. This might take the form of a mostly home visit to where both parties and people of entirely opposite ideologies are required to meet and discuss and even debate issues of importance to each other. While it may be difficult to find and tolerate someone of the opposite ideas of you, I sense that this requirement may save the love and affection of many thousands of saints. These opposite engagements might be required of a racist, forced to listen to a person of color. A liberal should be required to listen to a conservative person. Indeed, these brothers and sisters may be entirely copacetic to their ideas on almost all subjects but one, and this one opposite should be enough to require these two to meet. I hope that after a few important meetings of this nature, that those that are relating in this fashion will quickly see that this is no longer a religious requirement, but that it is more than mere duty. It is truly one of the greatest continuous adventures of their lives. Likewise, a good religious-based university, period. Having been exposed to death at a very early age, 6 years old to be exact, I am infinitely qualified to address the issue of pain, guilt, and horror that arises by virtue of having been so exposed from such an early age to death and somewhat to suffering. At about age 12, I became convinced that my father was going to die. I was thoughtfully reading the Book of Mormon. On a slow and languid Sunday afternoon. Church was long over. The pot roast was scavenged to nothing. The soft elevator music of K-Suite, our favorite Sunday radio station in the afternoon, was so lovely and quiet. As I said, I was reading the scriptures unusually and probably rare for a boy of 12. I cannot remember having any important spiritual feelings at that point. So while I was reading, a voice came to me. It seemed like a voice of an adult, possibly the voice of my own adult self, speaking to me from the future. There is not a real way to tell you now after all these years. Nevertheless, I did hear a voice that simply said, "Your dad is going to die." I closed my scriptures and listened again, staring straight forward into the golden brown stripes of my bedroom wallpaper. I heard the voice again, almost immediately. "Your dad is going to die." I have come to learn over time what a revelation or spiritual premonition really is like. Looking back, I'm convinced that this was indeed a true personal revelation. A false revelation is usually derivative. That is, it seems as though a false revelation, or what I would call a simple self-convincing. You see, there have been many times in my life that I've gone to get on an airplane. I would get on the ramp and I would wonder if this will be the day that I die. Then quickly thereafter, I would feel an almost overwhelming sensation of impending death, a panicky feeling that I should run away from the deadly airplane that would surely crash at any moment after liftoff. Should I get on another flight? Should I even try to figure out the complications of transferring to another flight? Whatever I would do, I would have to do it now. After a few moments of sheer panic, I would convince myself of the foolishness of this whole idea of a plane crash. So I would go ahead and get on that flight and would try to face my fears. Inevitably, there would be no complications at all with the flight, and I would be forced to go back and simply analyze what went wrong with this new revelation or premonition. Or is this psychic dissonance or whatever it was that was troubling me as I anxiously walked down the plane ramp? What was it? Now that I've experienced these so many false revelations in my life, I am now able to say and impart to you with a high degree of certainty that I now know the difference between a true revelation and a false, self-convincing, self-generated impression misconstrued as revelation. The important difference is this. Pay attention here, those of you that would form up a religion. The revelation I received about my father's death was derived ex nihilo, or entirely outside of myself. While it is true that I was studying the scriptures, thinking back, I can see no evidence that I was reading about death, or was considering even the idea of death. I hadn't been watching any dramatic horror movies that addressed the ideas of death. The idea of my dad dying simply sprung into my mind from absolutely nowhere without any impetus that I can determine. Suddenly the words were there. They were absolutely pure words with no accompanying mental images. I had no visions of his death. It was simply told to me. Compare this with the self-derived, don't get on that airplane revelation. The airplane impression was preceded by my own consideration of the idea that, hey, this plane could crash today. Once I had this idea, the false revelation, in quotes, quickly followed from the earlier thought of a possible crash. One revelation, in summary, comes from a purely external source, while the other comes from an impetus thought, like a seedling, through which is planted, then sprouts into a feeling that indeed does feel a lot like a true revelation. They both feel almost exactly the same. These voices of warning, only one external and the other internal. Do not be deceived by your own tricky ideas and impressions. I have often referred to this record as my church. This may be a misnomer. The more I write, the more I fear that I will be considered a blasphemer, a cult-like wannabe, a false prophet, an antichrist. A false prophet or antichrist. I am not that ambitious. I would just like to see a church that is less preoccupied with sin, damnation, and guilt than most churches are. I feel that the elimination of human exalting themselves as judges of one another would go the farthest towards making a church where people stop themselves and each other and themselves from judging each other and themselves so harshly. No judges would certainly help. Let the law and a person's private impressions unstated be the only allowable judges. I would like a church to be a true and living church. What does this mean? The church should not be staid. It should be adaptable, flexible, changeable. If the church makes a mistake, then the church should own up to the weaknesses, then try to adapt and evolve away from that mistake. A church, like a person, cannot be perfect. If they own up to their weaknesses, then by their increasingly positive fruits you may know them. Just as with a repentant individual, a church should be able to fairly say, look, we are sorry, this church is imperfect, and it is run by imperfect men and women, and we will make any and all amends required by the law. Then we will go the extra mile in reparations. Then the church will be able to say, now we are perfect church again. We are operating under the best direction of well-inspired men, but we occasionally failed, but have made amends and can move on. That church will not be required to pay another farthing. They are free from the burdens of all past mistakes and can move freely forward. It's a form of church repentance. If the whole idea of parallel universes or string theory can be proven true, then we are all in a particularly unique position to atone for our own individual sins. If I sin and must pay a price to mete out my punishment to pay completely an eye for my individual sins, it is not possible to draw upon the life. Is it not possible to draw upon the life of another one of my parallel selves in another time, place, space dimension to enlist that alternative life to cause that other version of myself to pay the price of my sins for me? I could become, in what seems a very arrogant proposition, to become my own savior, saving myself and paying the exact price of my own sins through the life of my alternative reality, using this alternative life to pay my debts, which suffering I know not, because I cannot truly have said to have faced the pain, but rather another version of myself somewhere in time is paying the price for me. Maybe they were born in India. And so I can borrow grace. Sorry about that comment. Maybe I can borrow grace and can borrow atonement, and I can borrow payments for the sad mistakes I'm making daily in this life. We will all be infinitely better off, however, if all the alternative versions of myself have elevated and happier lives, avoiding the necessity of paying any prices at all. Hopefully a good life I live now is preventing another of my lives from being caused to suffer too much. And hopefully a better, more gracious reincarnation version of myself is contributing grace to my miserable, sinful current life. For this I thank myself. I still sense that this may be an entirely false notion, and that a loving Savior will always and ever be necessitated by those who live even a minutely perfect, and I mean imperfect life. I now turn to the etiology of the most important events which seem to formulate whatever spirit of prophecy that I have engendered thus far in my life, meager though it may be. When I was about 5 and my brother Trenton was about 3, I remember instigating a game of doctor with my little brother. This was not a sex game, mind you. It was a simple pretending to be a doctor and patient. I seem to recall placing a lamp on my brother's chest to simulate the bright light that would be found in any operating room. I had been to the operating room already several times in my young life, to have codeine pumped out of my stomach, to have my horribly bowed legs broken and then reset to straighten them out. I had my unusually deep voice cords cut and reshaped so that I would not sound like a deep-voiced man at age 4. They called me Froggy Voice. I may have placed the cord from the lamp in my poor brother's mouth, at which point he bit down and was electrocuted. I cannot remember anything that I saw. I cannot remember touching him. I only remember telling my mom, "Mom, Trenton is dead," repeatedly. Much has certainly been repressed. Next, flashing ambulance lights and my brother was gone. Then I saw him weeks later. I assumed he was dead, though really only sleeping. I am told my father laid hands on my brother's head and blessed him, even returned my brother to life after 30 minutes of heart stoppage. Needless to say, I was frightened of this new brother, this new monster, really. All he did was scream and mewl. He was terrifying to me. Where did my brother go? At night, in our attic room together, I would endlessly chant, "The swords of blood are coming to get you," in a childish and frightened attempt to keep this new monster in my room at bay. Nevertheless, it was a miracle that poor Trenton even lived at all. In my church, the doctrine of polygamy is acceptable both among men and women. I make no ulterior motives in simply acknowledging that the main benefit to polygamy is the great and quick growth of a polygamastic church that it will engender. While I am not overly preoccupied with the notion of church growth, I cannot deny for survivability a church needs a means for growth. Missionary work in my church will not be organized by the church, but rather will be instigated wholly by young people and retirees that feel the calling to serve a mission deep within their hearts. They should feel naturally compelled to serve in a manner of their own choosing, following the Spirit in choosing where they will go and who they will serve. Missionaries shall never do anything at all whatsoever by rote. They shall avoid all repeated patterns in their administration of their own missionary efforts, except and unless the Spirit advises them to establish a repeating pattern for a time. The Spirit cannot lead or guide a missionary that is tied to a certain geography or is tied to certain patterns of action. Instead, the missionary's mind must be ever nimble, easily entreated to go immediately where they are called upon by the Spirit of God to go. If locked and bound by tradition, patterns, rules, locale habits, routine, the Spirit is unable to communicate through all of the constraints, and the missionary becomes locked out of the inspiration, and that missionary will be trapped and unable to move, ninja-like, to a new assignment. Returning to the idea of polygamy, women and men alike shall be able to join in polygamastic interrelationships at will and without approval of any ecclesiastical leaders, although the agreement must be entered into by consent of both man and wife. The new spouse must be given by the established spouse. Notice I said wife, I also mean husbands. I would recommend that the doctrine of polygamy be instituted immediately so that others outside of the church will have to learn about, become familiar and acquainted with this controversial doctrine. There can be no threesomes or other such sexual indulgences, no matter what the proximity of the related spouses. Why polygamy? In heaven, or once in heaven, or once we all make it to heaven, we will all be married and interrelated as friends. We will all be brothers and sisters. After millions, billions of eons existing in existence, spouses will become bored with unilateral sex. It is inevitable that these immortals should, in their perfection, want to mix things up a bit. Sex will no longer be the overweening passion, the fiery furnace of desire, but rather sex will gradually, after about 1 million years or so, evolve into a simple expression of friendship and solidarity. Yes, it is true that it will be thrilling to trade spouses, and the fires of passion will be momentarily alight, but soon the new partners will grow beyond the short-sightedness and will converge back towards a simple, loving friendship again. That almost of a brother and sister friendship, but with a knowing and shy downward glance upon meeting again some 1,000 years hence at a family reunion in heaven, for example. Since my back just went out while typing these things, I will consider it a sign that I should stop writing at this time and close up and seal up this small, foggy vision of eternity in heaven to you and me at this time. Will the resurrected have genitals? This is a serious question that has perplexed me greatly over the last few months. Why I have received no clear understanding towards the answering of this question. I cannot see how a just and good God would castrate his children, no matter how lowly farm animals we may seem at times. Also, at what point before, during, or after the death, resurrection, and afterlife will this dreaded event possibly occur? When logical answers become this blurry to me, I cannot help but consider the idea of a Ken and Barbie smoothie, crotchless creature being any sort of sensical doctrine whatsoever. So I am most inclined to argue against the idea of afterlife castration as a torturous means of keeping the indigent of human races from having sexual relationships. However, the idea of such an eternal life sans penis so temporarily terrified and darkened my mind that the consummate fear of God was very deeply impressed upon my mind, that I think it is a good, if not troubling doctrine to keep it in the tentative corner of our minds until such a day, God forbid, that we either arrive at more truth here, or we are afflicted with the same proscribed punishment which would be a damnable day indeed. Sometimes it is good to live in some fear of God, to not diminish him to the simpler level of a mere friend or grandfatherly or even Santa Claus-like figure. In matters of fate, revelation, visions, irony, each in this religion is entitled to their own marvelous manifestations and whispered ideas of dreams and inspirations. Some will be given visions for many, visions of and for the entire earth. So long as these visions and ideas are not promoting death, suicide, or forms of anger, they are acceptable as visions for many. All visions should be taken in with a grain of salt. If that salt has lost its savor, then it will surely soon be spewed out of the mouths of them that do hear. Do not put so much stock in their visions that you do change your entire life and lifestyle to go after their visions. These visions should be considered to be first and foremost works of art. Spiritual things are created ex nihilo, out of the minds of the unassuming. They are not planned for, but they emerge full-blown from the mind or dreams of man. They should not be derived from anything. They should simply appear unmotivated. The best of history's revelators were surely a group of visionaries that were called surrealists, because they relied on their dreams to fully inform their artistic creations or revelations. Take in another person's art revelations as you would take in a great work of art or fiction. While a good book or painting is certainly endowed with a great sense of truth and mystery, nevertheless, it is still only a limited work of creativity or fiction. The ideas and metaphors, ironies and parallels and meanings are surely great and impressive in such art, but still, always remember that it is still an overarching fiction or an artifice for the presentation of meaning. In other words, appreciate the cult of art, but do not change your life or trajectory to go out after and follow it into a perilous and unknown wilderness. Beware of gurus, me included, that will try and lead you or brainwash you into following their ways. Especially beware if they have a high degree of charisma and invite you to follow them directly. If they have a power which is subversively sexual, this should also be a sign to not follow after them. While it would seem that an old man is the best choice for one to follow, beware an old man that is rich or full of his own success in life. A good old man is one that smiles and asks nothing, gives his advice freely, and listens quietly for a time before he speaks and imparts his wisdom directly, and not in parables or in enshrouded words that require more meditation or deciphering than they are worth. Also beware of clever or sarcastic gurus. They are only out to make you feel inadequate, which inadequacy can suddenly require you to want to be as clever or rich or successful, or as followed as the guru himself. This sudden awareness of your falling short immediately requires you to begin a dangerous followership. You are quickly ensnared in the guru's desire to find followers by promising a way. None of these concerns apply at all to Jesus Christ, because he was worthy of all followerships that he ever engendered. Let your gurus be your friends, your helpmeets, your servants, though beware the entanglements that their servitude may alight. Let your gurus treat you like an equal. If they take your money, see that you borrow some back from them from time to time as a test of their sincerity and friendship. With these meters in place, a guru can be judged worthily. It is very near that a good guru requires your life of you, or it is very rare that a guru requires your life of you, or of you to take the life of another. Beware death when you follow anyone. If you choose to give your life to your guru, let it be entirely of and on your own accord with no premeditation. But your sacrifice should explode forth ex nihilo again, extemporaneously. The idea of sacrifice should come quickly, and no words of the guru should have inspired your decision. One never to be made in rashness after only having known your guru for a short time. Your relationship of trust should have been built after many years of close and trusted friendship in which the guru actually sees you as the guru. Best if your guru think of you to be his mutual guru. The equivalency here will save many lives. Along with Christian ideals, I would recommend Buddhist ideas to your religiosity, which complement Christ's Christianity well. Don't be too self-loathing or hateful to your past. Fear not so much the future. Try and enjoy the here and now. If you're working on a piece of art and someone you respect invites you to go to an interesting lecture instead of working on your art, what should you do? If you are having fun now, working on your art now, don't give up a real fun now for a merely potential fun later. Keep your now fun close to your heart. Now fun is the safest bet for a life of full satisfaction. Remember not to misconstrue fun with wanton self-satisfaction. There is nothing wrong with fun, but self-indulgence can become an evil. Enjoy family the most and best. Family should always come first and must be the source of all satisfactions. Ultimately, the best lesson to learn is balance, or a middle way between overzealousness and laziness, trust and full mistrust, rich and poor, laughing and anger. Find balance. Beware of imbalance as well. Avoid plotting and idiotic sayings like the sentence before this, where I try to incorporate contradictions or paradoxes in a clever and self-indulgent way. This clever obscurity may seem deep, but it is a pretext for confusion that will only waste your time in trying to figure out an unfigurable, overly clever parable. It is a fake deep, and should be held in suspicion. Suspicion and tentativity are an important mainstay in the pursuit of religion, of the religious. I think that it is imperative at this point that I begin to delineate the basic doctrines that I would adopt for the benefit of my church. I would like to see all the doctrines of this church be rooted in the basic tenets of Christianity. If your civilization is unfamiliar with Jesus, I would like to describe his character and mission at this point in my document so that you may know and learn who I put my faith in, Jesus Christ. It is about zero in our calendar. A man was born near Jerusalem, near the Dead Sea, in a place or area which we call the Middle East. It is a most deserty terrain, difficult to live in at times. Born into simplicity and humility, a child was born in a miraculous way. This mother was a virgin, never known by man to that point. Her child was Jesus. This Jesus child, came from God. God was Jesus' father, and his mother was a human. And so Jesus was half God and half human, so that he could be alive and suffer immensely for his human friends. Yet he could also fix his own dying or dead body with the help of his godly Father. He would know troubles, trials, sufferings, and he would see very little tangible rewards in his short life. He lived less than 40 years. Too short, it was essential. Too short. It was essential that he lay down his life or die and be able to come back alive again. And in this way, he was able to break the chains of death. The other miraculous thing about his character was that he was perfect. He made no mistakes, at least nothing that would make him so impure that he would not be able to sacrifice or give his own life to stand in the stead of me. You see, I am so imperfect that I really need the help of a powerful, godlike, perfect, loving, and helpful big brother to step in for me and pay a price to God the Father for me, for my weaknesses and shortcomings. While God may seem like a bit of a bully for requiring a price to be paid for our rotten, lousy mistakes, notice the several typos in this last few sentences, and you will get a sense of the basic human foibles, weaknesses, pride, stupidity, and inadequacies. I am imperfect. Do not think that just because I'm writing this, that in my arrogance I am a wannabe prophet, that I should be seen as the only one and true standard bearer or prophet for this given time. Indeed, there are many at any given time that work together to try and establish truths, churches, doctrines, revelations. And there can be many such in the mouths of 2 or 3 people. Only will the most truths be established. Back to God. It may seem that God is a bit of a bully. After all, he is God. Why does he have to be so anal about following every little rule that he establishes? Why can't he simply use his godly power to say, "Oh, forget about it"? Why can't he simply make exceptions and sweep past edicts and petty judgmentalness under a rug? Can he show a little favoritism to those who give their all only to fail again and again? I guess the answer to all these is no, and that's it. God is perfect, so he clings perfectly to his rules. Once firmly established, they cannot be shaken, or the devil will have grounds to whine and charge, "You are arbitrary, unfair. You play favorites with your human race." But God cannot be a respecter of persons. He must play by all the rules he has so carefully established and tested over many, many billions of years. He wants us to love each other, him, ourselves. He wants us not to steal, to really hate thieves. In fact, I live in daily fear that this very record will be seen as some sort of amazing work of art worth money, and that a misguided soul will steal this record and will try to cash it in and get gain, or to build themselves up in the esteem of other men or women. Thievery should not ever be an end to a means. If you do steal this document, I curse you. Don't steal it. Put it back. Although I would love to see the rich stolen from the poor, Robin Hood style, nevertheless I must fully disavow stealing in any form. Embezzlement. not doing a full day's work for a full day's pay, stealing for the young person's desire to be clever and seen as cool by one's peers. When I was young, the worst sin a teenager could commit was the simple sin of disingenuousness and pretentiousness, deadly sins that later in life gave way to a more egregious sin of hypocrisy and manipulation, or the gradual evolution even to becoming a character disorder, a martyr, or someone who manipulates through subversion, indirect digs, sadistic discounts. The dreaded sin of hypocrisy and judgmentalness infects the entire soul and quickly becomes a cancer, a narcissism, unstoppable, the pain being so great that you cannot understand, which no morphine drip will extinguish or curtail. Luckily, to follow after hypocrisy and judgment comes hate. I don't know about luckily. Unluckily, to follow after hypocrisy and judgment comes hate. Then your soul is surely damned at that point. Hate leads to murder and death and short and insignificant life. Don't accept the arrogance and pain that you leave behind for all others. Is this the legacy you would like to leave behind? Remember, when I write you, and point at you, I am really indicating all of us, myself as well. Indeed, 3 fingers point back at me, myself, whenever you find me arrogantly pointing. Whenever I arrogantly point out your inadequacies, I am merely pointing out my own. This is again the simple, often brutal nature of the common man or woman. So we have established that God must play by his own rules. If a person sins, they must pay a set price, and established probably even before God himself came into being. I can pay for some of the price of myself. I may be able to have some other version of myself somewhere in space, me, or in another dimension pay the price for me. No, this should not be a fully adopted doctrine at this point, because I find it interesting to dream. Most of the times that I've written about or tried to elucidate this doctrine of vicarious lives or the atoning for sins through alternate versions of myself in parallel universes, that my typewriter seizes up, and I find it very difficult indeed to work past the technical difficulties that will allow me to continue explaining this rather strange doctrine. Remember that this is a true and living church, meaning that this church, like a child, is able and capable and encouraged to change, grow, repent, and improve daily as it is set out in the timeline of existence. While this church may be perfect in some time or state or existence at present, it is still inadequate and cannot perfect a single soul without Jesus Christ's help. So how do I pay my sins bill in this life? I cannot fully repay it, nor can I really even be sure of the complicated math, calculus, or formulas required of me to calculate the debt, nor can I fully comprehend the cost of each sin relative to one another. If one sin is worth 5-degree increase in hell's temperature, this sin is then worth 10 degrees? No. The whole notion is absurd. God and Jesus work together to determine such weights and balances and the scales of justice. Now, how do I know that God is not a ruthless, fanatical, rule, despot, bully, exacting the uttermost farthing for each and every puny human scales, weaknesses, and sin I commit? The short answer is, this God and Jesus agreed that Jesus would condescend and come down to this miserable earth and take a half-human, half-God body, and that he would walk and talk with us humans and should really be like, the humans, which should really be like simple pets or insects to one of his intelligence, compassion, perfection, that he would be our friends. The others even more stupid and hateful than us should pass judgment on him, make fun of him, entangle him in our pathetic and convoluted bureaucracies, and bind him physically and put nails through his hands and feet and put a crown of thorns on his head and mock his kingship and then brutally murder him. Oh, but what a surprise he had in store for all they that did hate on him. He came back alive. 3 days later, his eyes were as a flame of fire. He shot lasers of light out of his skull and cut the children of men asunder like a sharp two-edged sword. He would drink their blood, and then their flesh was divided at the waist, and the top half of their bodies slid off and plopped to the ground, while they looked up at their own legs that remained standing as they slowly stumbled about, severed in half. Then he took to glowing and hated and burned and torqued the very earth out of its orbit, and the air was sucked out of the atmosphere until the reddies clutching at their throats as the earth swelled like fetid meat, until the earth melted with the putrefaction of the maggots. Indeed, the whole planet became maggots except for the core of the planet, which was refined to pure gold and iron, until this vengeful Jesus, who actually helped create us in this very planet, which he was in the process of outright and instantaneously destroying, was swept up in a gesture of his almighty hand and hurled back through space-time to be reset, cleansed, and essentially recycled until a new form of life, a bit nobler than the human race, could be created and cultivated and planted thereon. Sounds scary? Well, it didn't really actually happen that way at all. Amazingly, when Jesus came back alive after he was crucified on a tree, he shot no fire, he cut no one asunder, he did not shoot laser beams from his very skull. Instead, he came quietly out of his burial tomb, and he held his sweetheart. He held his sweetheart. He hugged his buddies. He showed them some scars, and he decided to keep. He loved them. He avoided his enemies. He went and did a few more errands. He ate some fish and honeycomb, and then he floated above the earth. He drifted up, and he said he would come again after he had more time to cool off. He learned that if people were continuing to be too bad and couldn't be bothered to be good after all the good he'd done, then his promised return or his second coming might not be so pleasant next time. But even then, this would never be about revenge, hate, or payback. It would be one last try at getting the stupidity of the human race to wake up and learn to change. All religion comes down to this: learn to change. See where your weaknesses are, think them over a while, even if it takes years. Get some friendly advice from old geezers that would not judge you. Learn from the stories of others' mistakes. Adapt, overcome, improvise. Be tentative. Do not make manifestos that you don't make arrogant manifestos that you shove down others' throats in your anger, like force-feeding a baby bird with your pinky, a baby bird that fell from its mother's nest. Do not hold doggedly to a puny-minded or judgmental idea of right and wrong or true and false. Rather, do be easily entreated. Be quiet, insomuch that you will be able to hear what your heart is prodding you towards with little thudding, bloody beatings. Each beat will right you slightly, correct your navigation by a simple, subtle throb that corrects you over many thousands of pumpings and proddings. Your spine will be gradually ticked back into alignment, and you will stand straighter with these minute course corrections, the corrections of a helpful heart. While mankind is generally reprobate, men and women themselves as individuals can be resplendent. The fire and light of one good human can snuff the torrid stuff of many a reprobate. Because God gave his only and actual Son of the flesh, we have two important doors open wide for us. We no longer need live in fear of death. Oh, sure, it may hurt a little at the moment of death, inception, as it may be a little scary, and it may be a little scary due to the fear of the unknown. But you should remember a time in your life when you graduated from something less into something more. In my day, a kid goes from grade school for children up to 12 years or so into junior high for kids that are a little older. Such a step can be a frightening adjustment to make, going from grade school to middle school or middle school to high school. But maybe you have done such a change in your life. Can you see that by looking back, it wasn't quite as bad as I imagined it at the time? You probably adjusted rather quickly to the changes, to the new. So it was when we came to this earth life. So too will it be when we die and move into the next life. Jesus broke the chains of death. He will come to to yours and my graves, and he will dig us up. He will take whatever time is necessary to gather up all the hairs from your very head, and will cause a warm wind to collect your lost DNA, skin, hair, fingernail clippings, whatever parts of you he requires to devise a new and perfect version of you, recollected, assembled, reassembled, better, stronger, faster. We will rebuild them after our image to be godly, incorruptible, and perfect. We may or may not eat. These things will be worked out. If some part of your body, a cell, or possibly an element itself, hydrogen or oxygen, is being already used by a human body that has been resurrected before your turn, these things will be worked out by a knowing, loving, fair, honest, kind Jesus. He will no longer favor the rich in this life. Why? Because no one will be poor under Jesus' tutelage. Arrogance will be despised and trained away entirely due to a probationary time which Jesus will establish. The first will be the last, and the last may be first, so don't be jealous if someone you deemed unworthy is suddenly given the same or similar reward that you were promised in this life for being good. Indeed, you'll be shocked and possibly appalled by those who stand next to you in the after resurrection. Do not judge, lest you get rejudged by your own harsher criteria. This is ultimately the most important lesson you can learn in this life. Do not judge. Look at your house. Look up at the tallest tree. This is God. Now, look down at the earth and find a little bug or critter in the soil, if they still exist in your time. Actually, find 2 insects and compare their sizes and levels of intelligence and spirituality compared to you, and then imagine that your level of advancement is even as progressed as the size of the tree I referred to earlier. The 2 ants are like you and me. No matter how much greater I think I am than you on the scale of relativity, I am nothing noticeably better than you in comparison to that tree. Compare the tree to you as ants, is what I'm saying. I only have a few years of traumas and experiences on you. At best, God had been around for centuries, countless billions of my lives, I mean. He has fathered countless billions of worlds and children. It is all about a sense of proportion that keeps you kind to your fellow man, that keeps you from overweening arrogance and pride. God hates pride, judgment, hypocrisy, holier than thou, because we are all like those puny, pathetic ants to him. One is barely better than another, yet his hand is stretched out still, and yet he still loves us, which is the only thing that makes us barely worthy. As a wise man once wrote, man is nothing compared to God, which thing I had never supposed. And yet he loves us still. He loves us still. He loved me still. He loved you still. He loves us still. He loves us. He loves us still. Still loves us. A leaf falls, one loneliness, but he loves you still. For this, we should be thankful to even exist, and then turn this sacred love towards others. Turn off the laser beams of hate and judgment protruding like ungodly horns from our heads, and let others live and exist and swallow up our narcissism that trains us to become devils. Why any art or revelations that you leave behind should be left with the utmost sincerity and purity of heart. God deplores sarcasm, bitterness, hopelessness, ironic winking, making fun of others, mockery. They who mock shall mourn. Do not make your art in depression, darkness, or hatefulness. While it is okay to incorporate these emotions into your revelations, art, this bitterness, when indulged in its entirety, makes for insincere and helpless work, which benefits no one. I do not require only happy and cheerful art, for this can be just as disingenuous in its own right. Just make every effort to remain sincere, even if your sincerity is only a shadow of what you may have felt in some long-gone time past. Now I would like to address a strange and mysterious doctrine that occurred to me ex nihilo, which is the best gauge as to whether an idea is truly a true revelation or merely an idea. I asked myself a spontaneous question. Questions, too, are usually the best way to stumble upon possible revelations. I was asking myself about the mysteriousness of time. I've been told in my Mormon religion that there is no time where God lives. He lives in a timeless state, void of beginnings, middles, and ends. I cannot reconcile this idea in my head with the time and timeless with which I am now familiar, the time and timeline with which I am now familiar. How could I live in a timeline, and yet God lives in timelessness? The two seem too incompatible to me. If we live under his umbrella of timelessness, then it must needs be that I am there with him now, also in a state of timeless being as well. It is a narcissistic idea, but not if we consider that God is spending such time with each of his children because he can make of time what he will. And so we and he are sitting there together in heaven watching over my life and my life only for a period of time. Together and with the help of relatives and gurus and guardian angels and fathers and sons. We all sit in council together, and wives, I should say. We all sit in council together as about only my life, just as he is also now sitting with you and counsel exclusively about your life for a time or an eon or whatever it takes to help us figure out exactly what we are and what our lives are meaning. And so God takes a ball of time in his hand, and like a ball of twine, he says, this is you and your life. You may argue and say, no, I am more or less than that, God. What made me the way I am? How did I arrive? How did I arrive at this state of permanent being? To which God replies, well, why don't we find out, son or daughter? But I go on to say, my trials don't seem fair. Why did you make me suffer so? Why did that bad babysitter have to enter my fragile life at such an early point? Why did my brother die, then be raised from the dead? Why wasn't I an old man at age 7? These are the burning questions we would ask, but God in his infinite wisdom and understanding replies, let's go down and see why. He then takes his ball of string or twine of my life and casts it into space by the power of his almighty hand, and thus the Ancient of Days creates a timeline for my life, so I can figure out why I arrived and became the whole of who I am in a more understandable and perceivable fashion. The project of my life begins. God takes the best leather chair and I get one next to him, not so worn out, not quite so comfortable, so I can stay awake. And so my life begins. Also, in the subdued light of the room behind me, on ascending platforms like wide stairs, I sense my father, my wife, my children, and everyone there to support and advise me. I am grown from babyhood. Yes, it takes time, but it is important to eat milk before meat. Then the consultations begin. Everything seems to be going so easily and smoothly, apart from the difficulty of simply physically progressing through the birth canal and out of the womb. My mother sits behind me in the dark room, so I am a bit embarrassed at what I see there, but God assures me that it is only natural and that we have all been through it and will see it many times again. A new and most important question, God advises me. Okay, you've had an easy go of it so far, but I think it's time for a trial. You can only figure out how you arrived if you are ready to face a trial, a struggle, a problem, the noxious weeds of your life, to see how you will take it, to see how you come out clean, or with blood on your garments, or placing blood on the garments on others' garments. So all together we consult and choose something to go wrong or even right, because some of the worst tests will come through riches, advantages, prides, and overweening intelligence. And so I choose. God nods his head and allows the trial in motion. My guardian angels protest and beg to come to my aid, and they are allowed for a time, and at other times they are denied access. This is a Gethsemane where Jesus suffered, that is set aside just for you to go through together alone and without aid. For it is at those times when I will really and truly see what I am made of and how I arrived at God's side in friendship. I hate to watch myself going through the assigned trial, but I can no longer say, "Why me, God?" I now know why and how and what for. And because we assigned the fiery furnace temperature together, God and me, some trials arise and my family pleads, "No, it's too hard, please no." But God and I override their concerns and decide to meet it out. At the beginning of my life, childhood for example, I can pray and my prayers are answered almost immediately in a one-on-one ratio. I asked for the reasonable and is granted nearly immediately. Besides, I am there with God, and with His permission, I can even grant permissions and rewards and punishments and answers, whatever it takes to answer prayers in my own life. If something goes wrong, I never blame God because I approved these trials under God's self-same tutelage. Angels may be sent to minister from time to time, and gurus may be assigned to cross my path to aid me. I agree, it all seems so self-centered. But not if the same attention is granted to every living human soul. All the time they need, all the attention directed to one soul by God and all the people that are helping Him on the panel. Undivided attention, because God has all the time in the world. The one great whole of my life is thus broken into separate and distinct events in a timeline so that each event can be carefully scrutinized for meaning and lessons and understandings. Sometimes the answer is that it's too random, just too random to find meaning, and so I can move forward with helpful doubt. Certainty about God's existence would not be a learning experience or trial at all. As I progress towards the teenage years, I crave for separation and independence from God or family. God's answers to my prayers become fewer. As I grow in my longing for independence, it is not so much that God is abandoning me. He is helping me grow up, and He is allowing me to choose to be good on my own accord, for my own reasons. Everyone in life must at some point make a deliberate and purposeful decision to be good or bad without any external influence, either God or Satan. There comes a time to choose, yet choose ye this day whom ye will serve. Many call it a born-again experience. One can decide to change, and by simple virtue of making such a decision, God and His helpers will open doors and make the path straight again. Into adulthood, God answers my prayers much less, but the answers are true revelations when they come, maybe twice a year now. Into old age, there comes one last trial of faith, which is man loves God. Man is pretty sure that God loves him back. Man hasn't heard from God in some time now, but man trusts that God is still there, and he is just maybe focusing on helping others more now, or maybe God has come to trust in us and knows now that we are reliable old souls. The only thing required of us now is to simply endure to the end, maybe help each other, maybe sit on their panels. Endure to the end, to keep up our trust and goodness. As a baby and child, others will impose their agency on the child. Those that are older than them will experiment with using satanic force of will on the innocent, either through abuse, manipulation, anger. Into the teenage years, a gradual evolution appears in which the teenager now learns to impose their will, Satanism, on others. They no longer only need to take, they can now give too. Who knows what each person will evolve into unless God knows. He may be the only one to know. The Book of Life is read all together by those who are fascinated and eager to watch the lives of those they love unfold. After all the trials and all the tribulation and all the joys and sadness and love and treachery and kind generosities have played fully out, no matter how short the life, the book is closed, death. The string or twine is rolled back up into the palm of the master's hand. The shining crystal is handed back To he whom life it is recorded on, and we will each individual look into God's eyes, and we can honestly say, I see now why I am who I am. I know now why I have arrived here with you, and I know now where I will belong forever and for good. Thank you for taking the time to explain it to me. It has all been so fair, and I see why I made the decisions I made. I may have started out good, I may have ended bad, I may have started poorly and then ended up choosing the good, but whatever the course, I now am fully here. Because of this great experience and practice on our lives, sitting right next to God, I am now ready to become like God. My practice on myself is over. I've learned how to respect the agency of others. I've learned to design appropriate trials relative to what they might endure, and now I am ready to help others advance in the same way. I have become like God. I can sit on their panels. What can I do to help? What can I do to help? How may I serve my fellow children of men? How may I help? I am ready. Use me to help. This is the evolution of man, of nothingness, into man or woman of God. I call this doctrine of timelessness the doctrine of simultaneity. Simultaneity. I have done my best in writing this document to create a religion of my own individual device, not by inspiration, though I would like to think that at least portions of this work are worthy of being called inspiration or partially prophetic, if such a thing can be allowed to exist. But I have tried, through my experience and my simple desire to do good, to write a set of ideas and edicts that will allow a person of sound mind that someday in the eons that will divide my hiding of this record to its discovery in hopefully the distant future, that person who finds my ideas will find them useful and helpful in the setting up and administration of their own religion, a religion that must be seen as just and equitable for all that choose to unite themselves with this movement. Many of the principles herein seem very rooted in my own desires and my own ideals and ideas and longings, but if followed enthusiastically and combined with more mystical ideism, I do believe this record will form up a great and noble church where members of the church do love each other well, where the members do not judge one another, where artists are held in the members' hearts in their right and proper esteem, rooted in the people's desire to follow the visions and images produced by these fragile shamans. A religion where artists are fully and especially recognized as the humble prophets and seers that they are and have become by the lifelong practicing of their seership, vision-making, and earth-shaking tests of our patience and discomfort that the artist causes in our daily lives, which discomfort is clearly a clarion call for everyone in hearing to repent, make amends, change their ways, and open their eyes. Only artists and prophets are capable of bringing about these drastic changes or chiropractic adjustments in the perspectives of those that would see more clearly. Heed the artist's admonitions to listen, see, and smell like a child again. Do not ever follow them into cult-like death. They may manipulate you and they may adjust your mindset, but do not follow anyone to death. Preserve your life at all costs. There's still so much work for you to do. The artist can create the illusions of light of a sunset or from a reflection where no light in reality does exist. This is yet another power, a special power of the artist, but they cannot in and of themselves create real and full light. Their light is but a mere reflection of the truths around them. So be not deceived. Last of all, you can see that I have been sincere in the creation of my religion, in this record too. And in many ways, it is but a religion devised for and by me. I cannot fully recommend it for all. I do not want to mislead. I think these ideas will lead you to live a better life, but I cannot say in full good conscience that you should sacrifice all the good you have amassed simply to follow the uncertainty that is me. I would advise against such blind obedience. Take of my revelations what you will, and modify them according to the fleshy tablets of your own heart. Lastly again, do not judge one another. With this edict you shall happily live, with a sweetness and joy unknown to those that hunker in darkness, in darkened houses, a joy unknown to those that hunker in darkened houses and spy through cracked yellow curtains upon their neighbors' lives with greedy and covetous eyes. Be not likened to them. So in the end, I should declare clearly unto you that I am a mere stay-at-home type prophet. I do want you to take my ideas and understand all the edicts of my church, the principles thereof clearly, and I would have you incorporate these ideas into your life, but my inadequacies and lack of authority preclude me from declaring that this is the only and simple way to live. Be tentative and follow your book. Signed, Vance, Mellen, Artist.